All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelsey Redkey. I'm the editor of the Daily Chronicle, which is part of Shaw Local News Network here in DeKalb County, here with candidates for the 70th House District, Republican incumbent Jeff Keicher and Democrat candidate Randi Olson. Also here with my colleague Kevin Solari.
Kevin Solari. I'm one of the regional editors with Shaw Media, including DeKalb County, Kane and Kendall.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. So we're going to give you guys a little chance to introduce yourselves. We'll start with Jeff first. If you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little about why you're running.
Sure. So I'm State Representative Jeff Keicher. Currently hold the seat in the 70th District in the Illinois House. I first ran because the fiscal state of this state was absolutely in tatters. I think if you look at my history and the resume of things that I've been able to accomplish, we look at things like expanding breast cancer screening, helping to resolve the waste hauler issue with all the trash and debris that's coming out of the waste hauling trailers along our state routes in our area. The data center incentive that's given a shot in the arm to property tax issues and jobs in our area for high tax avoidance. And then we also look at some of the more soft things that I've tried to work on, which would be the human trafficking bills and the domestic violence issues that I've tried to address head on. I've got some grave concerns still about the budget in the state of Illinois. We, when I got there, had a $39 billion budget. This past spring, we passed a $53 billion budget. That's an increase of $14 billion or 35% over 6 fiscal years. And Democrats insist that they need another tax increase this spring. Just doesn't hold water. So we've got issues to do. We need to restore balance and ethics to Illinois state government, and that's what I'm seeking to do.
Thank you, Jeff. And Randi, if you want to also go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself and why you're running.
Okay, my name's Randi Olson, and I currently reside in Cortland, Illinois. I've been here for 23 years, but I've been in DeKalb County for about 48 years. And I currently serve as a trustee on the Cortland Town Board, and I've really enjoyed that. And I decided to run because the political discourse out there right now is, as we all know, is pretty rough. And I felt that was something I could bring to Springfield as well. Being able to work across the aisle and actually talk to people and listen. I have a good background of working with people from all walks of life and helping them with issues in their families and taking care of what their needs are. And my staff as well. I managed a daycare center and helping my staff out. And yes, the budget is always something we need to work on, but that's something we need to work on all the time. And so I want to make sure that we are also working on issues for working families, such as early childhood education, because we're facing such a crisis right now with having the daycares being accessible. We're facing a daycare desert and affordable for families, and it's still being high quality. So those are some of the things I'd like to take care of in Springfield.
Thanks so much, Randi. So we're going to move into our questions, and we'll start with Randi first for this one. You touched a little on this, Randi, but if you could tell us a little about if you were elected, what would you say would be the 3 priorities that you would want to tackle in your first term?
My 3 priorities are protecting women's reproductive rights. I would like to see an amendment put on the ballot for where I put on a referendum, put an amendment on the ballot for protecting abortion rights. And I feel this is very important. And I do believe it also leads into protecting IVF, because if you do not support abortion, scientifically, it doesn't make sense to say you support IVF. Because if you know anything about the process with IVF, if you believe that life begins at conception, that's when you have the embryo. So I worry that people who say they still support IVF don't, because it really is just not logical. And early childhood, of course, is my passion. And one thing I want to help on in making that, it's so important for working families to have good quality daycare so that they can get to work. And it's also very good. It's very important for our communities to make sure they have that, because we need the employees that can go. And also having access to mental health care. Because I know in the rural areas, they're having struggles having access to mental health care and, and healthcare in general. So I know they're having troubles with that.
Thank you, Randy. And same question to you, Jeff. If reelected, what would you say would be your 3 priorities that you would want to tackle in your next term?
Yeah, I think the first would be ethics reform. I sit on the Legislative Ethics Committee and Commission, and what we look at are the ethical lapses that we see within the legislature. It's a bipartisan, bicameral organization. But more specifically, we need to empower our legislative inspector general with subpoena power and to allow him to take and investigate wherever a lead may take him. Right now, he is severely limited on what scope of issues that he can look at, a timeline, et cetera, et cetera. And as we see in the headlines this week with Democratic Speaker Madigan and the issues he's facing, I think ethics reform is the one thing that we need to give to the Illinois voters to allow them to restore trust in the political leaders in Springfield. So I think that is top. Then I'll go to the number one issue that I have constituents mention to me, and that's the high cost of living in the state of Illinois, especially when it comes to property taxes. I've been one of the leaders on TIF reform and TIF bills out there to reform the system. I do not suggest that TIF is a horrible system, but it is abused and it needs to be reformed. I have a bill pending there right now that would remove the 47-year option to extend a TIF. If we can get property taxes under control, we can then allow folks to come back to Illinois instead of fleeing. And I think that alleviates a lot of problems that we see happening in the state of Illinois. And then the big one that's on the horizon that our governor has kind of put us into a trick box on is energy availability and growth. So when we look at the issues that have specifically been cropping up with the ICC and the prohibitions that they've put in place with natural gas and new power generation, and at the same time seeing the governor's expansion into alternative energy sources that just don't have the capacity to meet the demand that he's putting on the grid with electric cars, and then the natural growth that's occurring with AI and other data, we need energy reform, because what Illinois has lost over the course of the last 2 years is somewhere near 2,000 energy sector jobs. We're talking the vast majority, 60% of them or so, are good union trade jobs, and they've had to go seek work in other states, because what the ICC under Governor Pritzker has denied is the ability for ComEd to invest in the future grid like they have been doing. And what has allowed us to have the reliable, cheap, compared to the rest of the country, power that we currently experience in ComEd territory is on the verge of disappearing. We need to address that right away for all constituents in the state of Illinois.
Representative Keicher, you can you'll go first on this one. You mentioned property tax burden, but there are plenty of other taxes in Illinois and municipalities and places like that. And it's a big concern for Illinois families. Taxes are always top of the list usually. What else can you do beyond property taxes? What would you do to alleviate the burden on Illinois families?
So I think it centers around property tax. There was a question that you guys put in your survey that talked about affordable home ownership. When we look at affordable home ownership, one of the things that we can call a forever mortgage is the property tax burden that's sitting out there. And when we look at the anti-job policies that Illinois Democrats have put into place that have taken employers and allowed them to locate in other states, if Illinois since 2003 had grown at the average rate of the states surrounding us, we would have 1 million more residents in the state of Illinois today than we do. Imagine what that does for spreading the tax burden across more people, more households, and affords people the opportunity to have better paying jobs and succeed right here in the state of Illinois. The other big issue with affordability in the state of Illinois, especially when it goes to taxes, is we look at the school funding. In the 1990s, the state of Illinois funded in excess of 50% of local school budgets. And when I arrived in Springfield, it was in the mid 20% range. Now we're seeking to change that with the EBF formula and add new revenues each and every year as we go on. But until the state steps up and takes on its obligation, and we again have 14 billion extra dollars than we did just 6 years ago, we have the opportunity to reduce the burden on local families. Additionally, there's something that we've called the Mark Batnick plan that deals with locking in percentages of the budget that are allocated towards relieving pension and property tax issues. And that would force future legislators to address the issue and not find, as Democrats have done since I've been there, new and creative ways to spend money in different areas, in different programs that are unproven. And the last thing I'll say is the governor sneakily, at the end of this last session, passed a tax increase on Illinois families in the way of property taxes. And the reason I say that is he removed the grocery tax of 1%, which I support removing any tax. But what he didn't do is he didn't fund the hole that creates in local budgets. 100% of the grocery taxation goes back to our communities and is leaving a gaping hole in what those budgets can do. And so the governor has now forced these communities to take on a tax increase. So again, we've got another Democrat policy forcing taxes and cost consequential things onto Illinois taxpayers.
Ms. Olson, same question. What would you do as representative to help alleviate the tax burden on Illinois families?
I do agree with Jeff on changing the school funding, that Illinois needs to step up and making sure that we're funding our public schools because we want to have good quality schools that will enhance them and entice people to actually stay in Illinois and move to Illinois if we don't invest in our schools. So we want to make sure that Illinois is investing in it, work on our school funding program, because I do believe that does need to be tweaked. And so that can help alleviate the property burden, the tax burden on that. So, but yeah, we need to get things to entice people to come to Illinois. And so, making sure they have the jobs, making sure that we, maybe increasing the Homestead Act, things like that. And making sure that we have good childcare, good schools, good jobs, because obviously the more people come to Illinois, the more that will alleviate the tax funding. And so we want to make sure that is working. And then I also believe, now I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
That's
So
okay.
I lost my last point.
That's okay. We can move on to the next question then.
Thank you.
And we'll do Jeff first on this one. That's right? Who went first? Jeff, you went second. No, we'll do Randy first for this one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm first actually.
I'm sorry, Randy.
You're fine.
So I want to talk a little, and you both have mentioned it's actually a little bit jobs and industry growth. So, I think especially in the 70th House District, obviously, we're here in DeKalb. We have seen a lot of that in the past 4 years. Jeff mentioned the data center incentives that have come down from Springfield. We have a significant data center here in DeKalb through Meta. Randy, do you have other industries that you would like to see move into the 70th district? And if so, what new legislation would you support in Springfield to aid job growth, development, industry in this district?
I don't have any particular job industries to come to the 70th. I would want industries that hire a good amount of people. As we tend to get the data centers hire a lot of people until they're built, and then of course the number cuts down. The warehouses, it's the same thing. We have a lot of people hired while they're building, and then the amount of people in there, it cuts down dramatically after that. So I'd like to see maybe more manufacturers, things that would be hiring a lot of people in one spot instead of just several once it's open. And so that would be good. And I think that any kind of tax incentives that we can get to alleviate the burden for people wanting to invest. But I'd also want to make sure those tax incentives don't end up coming back on the residents of the district. So finding a way to do that as well, and making it desirable. We have to make sure that we have a well-educated district so that people have employees that they want to hire. Otherwise, if we don't have a good workforce, people aren't going to want to build here or bring their businesses here as well. So I would, just working on getting people into the area and finding those businesses that want to come. So I think you would have to actually go out and search and research. I love the data centers for the most part. I do worry that we're building them so quickly. As Jeff said, we won't have enough energy. It's like, I feel like they're putting the cart before the horse. We need to, increase that energy before we're building the data centers.
Thank you, Randy. And same question to you, Jeff. I know you've talked a little about this before, especially with the data center incentive in Springfield. How would you support additional industry and job growth in this district?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually put data center growth back on its position. Whether you're aware or not, data centers have halted construction in the state of Illinois in many sectors because of our law, which is called the Biometric Information Privacy Act. And creative plaintiff attorneys are suing data companies for what data their data center user may be having on their memory cards in the data center. So data centers have halted construction. A conservative number from a Cushman Wakefield report in the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce suggests that somewhere upwards of $8 billion of new data construction is halted right now until those construction companies will see a reform on BIPA. Now, if we take the actual real annual tax burden on what property taxes in Illinois is over the average, which is about 3%, give or take, depending on the community, that $8 billion represents $240 million additional in property taxes that are not going to our local communities. Imagine what a shot in the arm, $240 million a year renewing would do for our school districts. And then we look at what happened in Yorkville a couple of weeks ago. Microsoft bought a 1,000-acre parcel in order to build another data center there. And if we can't do that, and Illinois continues to see its population bleed out, then what we're going to do is we're going to have fewer people here in Illinois to share on that same property tax burden and the backlog of the pension bills that are out there. We also need to remove some of the hurdles that we've placed on business. When you look at the workers' compensation structure in the state of Illinois, it's been designed to reward plaintiffs' attorneys and not saying that injured workers shouldn't be entitled to fair benefits. But what we've done is we've given plaintiff attorneys a golden check, and we see plaintiff attorneys everywhere advertising for injuries at work and how they can help people recover more and more and more. We look at things that Democrats have passed in the Illinois, like the minimum wage increase. We're going to $15 minimum wage, and I am not here to say that that is too little or too much. That is not the argument. But I think we can all agree, and constituents of the 70th district have agreed in the past, that $15 in Kane, DeKalb, or McHenry County is very different than $15 an hour in Effingham, Illinois. That's very different than $15 in Chicago. And so what we've seen, you go into any grocery store now, you go into any fast food restaurant, we've seen Democrats force small businesses to get rid of employees so that customers can now self-serve by ordering at a kiosk or scanning their own groceries. And again, that's fine. That's a small thing. But these policies add up, and they force employers, when they're deciding where to go, to look at other more attractive states before Illinois. And as I said before, had Illinois grown with good policies that create good jobs for good families, had Illinois grown at the same rate as our adjacent states over the past 20 years, we would have 1 million more residents in this state. And I think that's the answer. Once we get more people, and we see it happening in Texas and Florida right now, once we see more people coming in, that alleviates a lot of jobs, puts a lot of people to work, and alleviates a lot of problems, creates a lot of jobs, puts people to work, and brings families back to Illinois.
Jeff, this question's you first.
Right.
In recent years, we've seen an increase in partisan rhetoric around elections, and sometimes it turns violent. What would you do, or what can you do down in Springfield that would help bridge this divide between Democrats and Republicans and the left and the right?
Yeah, I think it starts at the local level. For example, Kevin, I still haven't had my opponent, the first two elections I ran, concede the election to me at those times. And we look at the agreement. I had a handshake agreement with my opponent the first time I ran that we were going to engage in a discussion on the topics that were relevant to the people of DeKalb County at the time. And instead, with 6 weeks to go before the election, we received a barrage of postcards in everybody's mailbox about what a rotten person Jeff Keicher is, how he hates women, he hates seniors, he hates NIU, he wants to shutter them all. And that's the type of thing that we need to stop. And unfortunately, I thought we were on that road in DeKalb, but it didn't go that way. I had discussed and kicked around a policy idea that I don't think meets the requirements of the First Amendment, but I want to outline the idea for you because this is where my thinking goes. If we have a political ad of any nature, print, video, or media, audio, and you are commenting on another candidate, you must give that other candidate's campaign 1/3 of the amount of time, video, audio, or print surface in a postcard or a newspaper ad. You must dedicate 1/3 for a response by that attacked candidate on the specific issue that he or she is being attacked on. Because what we're missing in so much of the political vitriol that I was attacked with is we're missing what the context is. And I have found that Illinois voters are very smart voters, and they know that they've been duped by Illinois Democrats many times. And so when you tell them the why behind what Democrats are saying about you, and you explain that it's not actually the truth, they begin to have a better understanding. And I think that allowance of a response is largely what's missing right now because we have one-sided dialogue. There was just an article that was released yesterday in one of the local media outlets, and Illinois Republicans are being outspent 11-1 by Illinois Democrats in our races. When you look at that, they're being outspent 5-1, they're being outraised 11-1. When you look at that margin, how do you compete? How do you restore balance to Illinois government? I don't know that you can. And the last data point that I would share with you is since Governor Pritzker began his first governor's race, Governor Pritzker has spent upwards of $323 million in Illinois races. You tell me that's fair, you're not speaking the truth. That's what we need to do. We need to return civility, discussion, and a balanced approach to how this money is coming into Illinois races because it is all askew right now. Thank you.
Randy, same question.
Yeah.
If you're representing the 70th down in Springfield, what would you do to bridge any partisan divide?
Well, when I'm down there, I would keep up the positive rhetoric. I would not constantly disregard the other party and speak about them in a negative tone as other candidates do, and constantly the Democrats this and the Democrats that. I would look into, definitely we need campaign finance reform. I'm upset, about what Jeff said about his opponent because Jeff turned around and did the exact same thing and attacked his opponent in the second election and called him some pretty vulgar things that I thought was a lot worse than Jeff's ads. So I just find that interesting because if you're going to preach that rhetoric, you got to practice it. You can't turn around and say, well, he did this, so I'm going to go ahead and do this too. You have to be the bigger person in the room and not do that. And that's very disappointing that did not happen. And so that was quite upsetting, and constantly blaming everything on the Democrats instead of looking for solutions to problems, we would be able to get more done. And being able to reach across the aisle. And when you're not always blaming Democrats, I think I know they do have the supermajority, but they will listen to you better if you're not constantly pointing and waving your finger at them. So, I've learned when I talk to people and I talk to my customers and my families, I don't ask them what party they're in. It doesn't matter. We just sit down and talk about a solution to the problem and what can be best. I mean, Jeff and I have agreed on a few things, like BIPA and things like that. But, the idea of what he's saying is just bizarre to me at this point. And like I said, I would definitely work on campaign finance reform. I know for my campaign, Jeff has, if you're talking about dollars, he has a lot more money than I have. So, that's fine. He's the incumbent. But it just means that, I have more boots on the ground, that I have to work that much harder to get my name out. And that's fine. That's just the way it is. But I would like to see more equal footing for races, because if you're working full time, it's very hard to get out there and campaign in the manner that you need to. If you own your own business, you have much more flexibility and time to go out and do that campaign. But when you're working a 40-hour week, it's very difficult. So, and I think we would get much better candidates racing if we could get that campaign finance reform done and give them the chance to run.
Thank you both for your answers on that.
Can I respond, since my name was used in debate on my issue?
Sure. Go ahead, Jeff.
I would make it very brief. The reason I sent postcards the way I did, and every last one of them was based in fact on what Madigan's operation had done, was because I couldn't trust my opponent a second time because he broke his word the first time. And I just received the Illinois Chamber of Commerce Bridge Builder Award for outstanding bipartisanship in accomplishing many issues in the state of Illinois. Thank you.
And because Jeff responded, do you have anything further that you would like to say, Randi?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, I do believe, I'm a strong believer, maybe because I was in education, just because if you think somebody's done something wrong, doesn't mean you turn around and do something wrong too. And the things that he sent out about Paul saying that he was against women because in one campaign he took a small amount of money from Madigan was crazy. And again, like I said, just because somebody does something wrong doesn't mean you should do something wrong.
And I just want to clarify for our viewers, the postcards that you guys are referring to are not this current campaign season.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So I want to move on and talk a little about gun violence and gun reform. So this was an issue, in the last campaign. Illinois has passed a ban on semi-automatic firearms. Since then, across the country, we continue to see mass violence carried out, through firearms. And we will go with Jeff first for this. I'm sorry, Randi first. I keep doing that, Randi. I'm sorry.
Bye.
So we'll go with Randi first for this. If elected, is there anything in addition to what has already been passed in Springfield that you would want to see in Illinois to address gun violence and specifically access to high-powered firearms?
At this point, there's not anything that I know of that needs to get done. I would keep things that are in place already. I don't know I don't know how they could enforce the registering your gun ownership, and they're not really at this point. I mean, if you're going to have a law in the books, I feel like it should be enforced, but I know they're having difficulty figuring out how to do that. But I would keep the semi-automatic ban in place. I do believe if you are a responsible gun owner, that's great, but I do believe if you're a gun owner, you need to be a truly responsible gun owner. So if your legally purchased gun ends up being used in a crime, I do believe that you need to be held civilly responsible for that, or possibly criminal. So just like recently, a young boy, 8 years old, got a gun out of a car and shot his brother, and he ended up going, he was arrested. But that gun should never have been accessible in the car for that 8-year-old. So that was not a responsible gun owner. So just like, if something happens when you're driving, you're held responsible. When you have that gun, that's a very important thing to have. I mean, it's very big responsibility, and you should treat it as such. So if something happens with that, I do believe you should be held accountable for it.
Thank you, Randy. And same question to you, Jeff. If reelected, is there anything that you would want to see come through Springfield to further address or change the way that people have access to firearms?
Yeah, as I think everybody is aware, I received a threat against my life earlier this summer. And so this issue became very close and personal for me. I have worked because of family circumstance at protecting survivors of domestic and sexual assault and human trafficking. So I have a huge amount of sensitivity to this. I also have utmost respect that we are talking about the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The framers of the Constitution put a method in place to be able to modify the Constitution, and to date, neither party has passed a modification to the Second Amendment. I think the recently passed semi-automatic gun ban reached too far because it's ill-defined and impacts weapons that shouldn't be there on their list. And so I think we will see that ultimately overturned at the federal level. When we look at what needs to change in the state of Illinois, I am very frustrated at Democrats giving lip service to fixing the problems. And so what we see legal gun owners being put under more and more onerous rules, and they are frustrated because we continue to see the vast majority of gun violence occur in the city of Chicago on the south and west side. We are doing nothing to address that. If we look at the report that Sheriff Tom Dart, a Democrat who's been fighting this issue for many years, there is in excess of 30,000 revoked FOID cards in the city of Chicago that we do not know whether those homes still possess firearms or not. So I'm going to go back to the idea that we need to enforce the laws that are on the books today. And that would remedy a lot of the gun violence volume that we see in the state of Illinois. Additionally, we need to address the mental health issues that are so prevalent in our society and that we continue to see with those that are using firearms. And right now, we do not have a method in place in order to do that in the state of Illinois. So I will definitely keep my ears open to hear what solutions are offered and see that if they don't meet the Second Amendment, that they aren't allowed to proceed.
Thank you both for that response. And I'm going to continue sort of along the same theme here. I want to talk about another piece of legislation that I think, again, is sort of coming back up in conversations this campaign cycle, and that is the SAFETY Act. And we will do Jeff first for this one. Just a reminder to our viewers here, the SAFETY Act, which is the cashless bail component of the pretrial Fairness Act, went into effect just over a year ago, so it has been a full year under this new system. Jeff, how would you assess that year? What are your thoughts on it as it stands right now? And is there anything that you would want to see changed in the way that it's being implemented right now?
Thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, and I was there in the room when this passed. So if everybody remembers, this was passed in the middle of the night on the last day of session in 2021 before the new General Assembly was sworn in. We began debate on this massive change to how law enforcement interacts, and we're allowed, I believe the number was 12 minutes of debate before the measure was voted on. This issue was not given a shining light to be able to go through and remedy some of the problematic areas that it had already had. But we see this commonly in the way Democrats shove through bills so that they can claim a victory, even though it's not a ground level victory. And so being there, being part of the discussion, we continued to raise implementation concerns about how this Safety Act was going to function and how it's counterproductive. And we have seen as a result of that, perhaps four, I can't recall if it passed the Senate, modifications or trailer bills to the Safety Act to get it easily implementable. And what we will see from my peers on the other side is they will go back to, well, this was all about cash bail or not cash bail. No, that's not what, that was a small part of what this was about. I completely agree that a millionaire should not be able to buy his way or her way out of prison for having a severe violent murder, attack. I completely agree. And I also agree that small petty offenses like getting caught with marijuana should not wind up putting somebody behind bars. But we have provisions in the Safety Act, and the very first one, as I circle around to answer your question, right now, folks that are on electronic home monitoring have, and remember, these are folks that we aren't putting into the prison because they didn't actually kill anybody. So they're still violent offenses. We want to know where they are at all times, but it didn't rise to the level of murder, or if it did, the evidence isn't strong enough to hold them in custody. They are allowed each week 48 hours of freedom without the electronic bracelet. There are so many issues that folks in the gang culture can do with 48 hours off each week. And I would argue that that's what we saw with a lot of the carjackings, Kia thefts, and other violence that we've seen in Chicago. If we look up and down Michigan Avenue in Chicago right now, there is empty storefronts galore. We need to change that. We need to modify the Safety Act to re-empower law enforcement to be able to use their best judgment. And we need to empower judges and prosecutors to best implement the way that the crime merits. And we've taken away that ground level ability for them to decide and discern what needs to be in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And same question to you, Randy. What are your thoughts on this full year of implementation under the Safety Act? And is there anything that you would change about the way it's being implemented right now?
I believe the law has been going well, as any law oftentimes gets written, especially one as big as this. There's time they have to do tweaks. I was happy when they delayed implementing the law. So people like Democrat State's Attorney Jamie Mosser in Kane County, she led a commission to work on those tweaks for the law. So they ended up delaying it and recognizing things that needed to get fixed. So that was good. I mean, they do listen, people do listen. And I believe that there are some offenses that still maybe need to be retained. So I would like the judges to have more leeway in who they decide needs to be retained once they go through the pretrial awareness and go through all that, such as child pornographers are not in the list of people who can be retained. So, and I just think that watching somebody online and monitoring their online is very impossible when they get home. So that's hard to do. So making sure the judges have a little bit more leeway. And I would like to see a little bit more, not a little bit more, I'd like to see some juvenile justice reforms in there. At this point, people under 18 can still be lied to by the police legally. And I don't think that should be, because they're so easily manipulated. And I believe when you're under 18, you should have a lawyer right away.
Okay. Switching gears again. Randy, you'll go first here.
Okay.
The 2020 census showed that Illinois lost population. We lost a congressional seat, and most of that came out of rural areas. What can you do representing the 70th district to help people stay here?
Well, we kind of went over some of that, is making sure they have jobs, making sure that the people here have access to good education. Another problem that comes up in rural areas is the hospital shutting down at an alarming rate. People don't, so if you're not going to want to go to a rural area, if you think you can't get medical care, there's not good schools, because I know the schools in the rural areas tend to suffer a lot too because of the way taxes are. And so we want to make sure, and we want to make sure they have access for things to do and have a good community. And so that they want to be in the rural areas. So bringing businesses to those communities is also important as well.
Okay. And Jeff, what would you do to ensure that people want to stay in rural communities, like not the entire 70th, but a good portion of it?
Love for that. Again, I think we went over a lot of this. If we look at allowing Illinois to have policies that attract job creators, we would have 1 million more people that are here. If we were able to do a little bit better with that, we would have so much additional opportunity for great jobs. When we look at the forever tax that you have with the property tax burden, the issues with those job creators becomes all the more important. And we look at data centers as being one of a myriad of solutions. But Illinois also needs to solve its pension backlog. Most residents who leave the state of Illinois mention that as being one of the biggest issues hanging over their head. It's one of the reasons I was a co-sponsor with my peer, Mark Batnick, now Dan Ugasti, on locking in a percentage of the state budget each year to make sure as the budget increases, the dollar amounts increase, and we start making real headway towards what that pension obligation is and knock it down.
All right, and we are getting into our final questions here. We'll do Jeff for this one. You sort of talked a little about this earlier, Jeff, and I'm interested to hear more about your both of your specific ideas. I think we've all talked a little about how expensive it is to live in Illinois. Cost of living, I think, is an issue across the whole country right now. We've talked about, enticing industry. We've talked about ways to bring more jobs in. I want to talk a little more about the first-time home buyers. I think, especially with this generation of people looking to purchase homes, there is that sort of financial accessibility component that I think is difficult for a lot of people beyond just the property tax burden. Jeff, what are your ideas? What programs would you support in Springfield, either new or have been proposed to help ease that first-time home buyer in the 70th district to make it more accessible for people to purchase homes?
Sure, and this is an important issue, Kelsey, especially as we look at there's less and less availability in the marketplace of houses for folks to be there. So if we look at the squeeze that's put on by the property tax, this is why when we look at the Facebook data center and the development that's happened in DeKalb, after abatement over the first 20 years, it will bring $132 million to property taxing units in DeKalb. That is DeKalb specific. That offsets and alleviates a lot of the property tax. And when most folks, especially seniors, are considering whether they're going to stay in this state, you look at the property tax burden. I am mortgage licensed, and when we talk to folks that are either refinancing or looking at purchasing, they are astounded at how reasonable the mortgage actually is. Oftentimes, prior to the recent rate increase, we were looking at under $1,200 on a monthly basis, which was very reasonable. But then when they look and see that they have $500-600 additional on top of that as an obligation for property taxes that never goes away, I go back to that forever tax, and that's a problem. I think this is a federal issue, and it needs to be looked at as a holistic type of approach, because what we've seen happen in Illinois is a lot of these creative programs don't actually net out at the scale that's needed to net out to actually have a real difference. The last point I would make is when we look at the causes of the 2008 crash and meltdown that we saw in our economy, it is well documented that it occurred because there were too many easy mortgages that were less cost consequential to a household than what the real obligation of a mortgage actually was. The last thing I want to do is to put a young family in a position where they are not able to afford a new house payment. And my fear with one of the suggestions that's been made in one of the articles I read recently, that we give a tax credit of $25,000 or $50,000. Listen, all that does is the same thing we've seen with the minimum wage increase. People are just going to increase the cost of their home for a new home buyer by that same $25,000 to $50,000, and it's going to go right into the pocket of the builder or the seller. We need to make sure we have good jobs, low property taxes, so that families, young families especially, can afford to buy in the state of Illinois the way they could in the 80s and 90s.
Thank you, Jeff. And Randy, same question to you. If elected, what programs would you want to see in Springfield, or what would you support to make it easier for first-time homebuyers to buy a home in the 70th district?
Well, when you had, that was part of our question on the questionnaire. So when my husband and I first purchased a home way back when, we did benefit with the federal program, the FHA, that helped us buy a home, because coming down with that initial payment for a house can be very difficult. We could afford the monthly payments. That wasn't the issue. We could afford the taxes, but coming down with the initial lump sum we couldn't have done without the help with the FHA loan. So these programs are important for people to be able to purchase homes. Just like it's hard for people who rent an apartment to come up with a first, last, and security deposit. So they're very helpful. I actually wasn't aware that the state already had a few programs in place. So, and they sound good, reading them. They don't give help to people who they believe cannot afford the monthly mortgage. So it's giving them help and getting that down payment for a house and getting them started. They do check out their credit and how much money they're making compared to the house they're buying. So it's not an easy loan. And it's not going to be like the housing crisis where they're just handing things out. The programs have been around a while. I don't know that many people know that they're there. I assume when they go in for a loan, they look into that. I did talk to a real estate person who was not aware of the programs even. So I would work on making sure those are things that people are aware of when they buy homes, that they can also get help through the state.
We are nearly at our closing, you guys. Thank you. I hope this wasn't as painful as you expected. So we will go ahead and start with Randy for closing. Randy, we're just going to keep it simple. Why should voters vote for you?
They should vote for me because I am incredibly hardworking, and I'm a problem solver. I dig to the root of the problem. I'm ready to do the work. I like to research the problem. I like to reach out and talk to people on different sides of the aisle, or just in life in general, look for the experts. I'm not somebody who's going to say, let's form a commission. I want to do the work myself and see what's the root of the problem and get that solved. I've been doing that for 30 years in my job, and it's just something I've become very good at, and being very pragmatic in running a business and knowing, how much money we have to spend and what we're supposed to buy and how are we going to make this work so that everything is beneficial for, the business. So being a stakeholder in a business and trying to make that work. And I'm ready to ditch the rhetoric and stop pointing the finger, Democrats this and Democrats this, or Republicans that. It needs to stop. We are at a dangerous point in this country. With the negative and painful rhetoric going on, and we need people who are ready to work through that and be a positive person in office. and fight for what's right and not just what's right for the party.
Thank you, Randy. And Jeff, same question to you. Why should voters vote for you?
I would offer that past behavior is the best indicator of what you should expect. I have a long track record of passing legislation, modifying bad legislation where I could, and this most recent spring, stopping 2 bad bills during floor debate on the floor. That doesn't happen a lot in a Democrat supermajority Illinois House. You look at the variety of things that I've worked on in my legislative career with breast cancer, domestic violence, human trafficking, data center incentive, the Blue Collar Jobs Act, the Illinois Works program. They are all centered on creating a better life for the people in the state of Illinois. And I don't think you see that carried out more directly than the constituent services that you see that we provide for our constituents out of our district offices. We have 3 district offices, and I consistently visit different areas of the district and receive amazing feedback at the problems with state government that we've been able to help resolve on behalf of our constituents. It's that type of actual impact in people's lives and impact in bills that I point to when I say past behavior is the best indicator of what you should expect going forward. And listen, I know that I am a very blessed individual. I was raised by a single mom who waited tables to keep the mortgage paid. I know that I am lucky beyond measure with my family, my wife, my kids, my business, my opportunity to go to Springfield and help. And what that benefit, what that blessed nature allows me to do is it allows me to act very independently as we see issues come up and make sure that the right thing is done for the people of the 70th district. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm glad that local media is engaged in this election, and I look forward to any additional questions you guys might have after this. Appreciate you.
Thank you both so much for your time tonight. I do want to remind our viewers that the election is November 5th. Early voting is already underway in Illinois, so you can cast your ballot in person or via mail if you want to already. You can view all of our election coverage and learn more about other candidates on your ballot at our Shaw Local websites. The URL is shawlocal.com/election. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.